Good afternoon and welcome to you. I just wanted to share a few things. Partly, actually, it was about a sort of personal view of things at the moment. I've just done a little piece on Sir Keir Starmer, and I wanted to just tell you a little bit about myself. One of the and then tie that in, if you like, to the current situation in Britain today. My own background is I was born Frank Farrell in Liverpool back a long time ago, and I was actually adopted because in those days my mum had me illegitimately. So my name, Frank Farrell, which was my birth name, was changed. And in YouTube, I go under the name of David Allen, which is my first two names. I wanted to just share a few things about me and how I, if you like, how I came to be and what motivates me. And that in some ways is quite important. Without going over the Sir Keir Starmer topic, which is on another video, I wanted to sort of look at Britain in the summer of 2024, which I have done, but I wanted to look at it from a personal perspective. So well over 10 million new immigrants or extra people live in Britain since the year 2000. Many of them are immigrants. Some are born here of immigrant parents. And in addition, there are around 1 or 2 million illegal immigrants here. We don't actually know how many who smuggle themselves onto these shores, many of whom have come via dinghies. And that's a contentious issue, I know. Over the last 24 years, 2000 to 2024, the Britain that fought World War II in 1939 to 45 has been completely transformed. Some would actually go as far as to say badly compromised and degraded as a cohesive nation that shares a common outlook beyond reasonable measure. So some people would say that. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that, but what I would say is that having 10 million extra people in a very small island is not perhaps a great idea. Now, to be fair, many immigrants want a better life. They can be hardworking, they can be loyal. And in fact, some immigrants give more than the indigenous population to the society on all sorts of levels. So this polemic is not necessarily about their racial origins and my views about them, although I will touch on that a little bit. But it does matter. Why? Well, I'm going to answer this then about me, anecdotally. My own racial background, if you like, from ancestry.com, which I did a few years ago. My maternal, on my mother's side, my maternal family line are mainly Irish. So on her side, she's completely Irish. And so I am, as a consequence, 45% Irish. And she also has 5% Scottish. That's probably something to do with Viking and Danish seaborne invaders. I don't know. But it gave her, when the details came back from ancestry.com, it was quite interesting because it actually gave the county in Ireland where she was from, and her name, her family name is Farrell, which is not an unusual Irish name. So my maternal family line are basically Irish. My paternal, on my father's side, they are Eastern European. And it was a family that came to Britain over 160 years ago, actually, in the 1860s. Probably more than that, sort of 180 years ago in the 1860s. So they were looking for stable work and commercial opportunities, if you like. So both sides of my family were hardworking and products of the day. One side Irish Catholics, working the land since it was probably first tilled a few thousand years ago, since time immemorial. Then the paternal line were a mixed bunch. Their backgrounds were, some of them were respectable business people, jewelers, people like that on one side. And then there were also hawkers, auctioneers, jewelers, and house clearance specialists on the other. In fact, the family line came up from the northwest of England. They'd settled in Manchester and Fylde, and the family name was Davidson. Had my mum and dad been together, I would have probably had the name of Frank Davidson. So the family name on my father's side was Davidson. Now, interestingly enough, I was adopted by a couple who couldn't actually have children, bless them, and they adopted me because it was very unacceptable when I was born for a mother to keep her baby. So there weren't single parent families as we know them today, and I ended up with my mother in a Salvation Army hostel, and I was adopted taken away from my mother about 3 months of age, and I was adopted into a very loving, very kind family, and my mother loved me and cared for me, as did my dad. What I would say about being adopted, I suppose the only thing I wanted to say is that there's more in that, and I haven't got the time to really go through that now. But I was loved, I was cared for, I was taught right from wrong, actually, and that was a very formative part of my upbringing. So my parents went to a chapel. They were quite, I suppose that the stereotype would be that they were quite fundamentalist Christians. They went to a Brethren chapel in Liverpool, and they believed the Bible as being the word of God. Well, what I would say is that, and it served me well when I was a teenager, I was taught what was right on one hand and what was wrong on the other. And there was a very clear line in those days between what was right and what was wrong. So that was something I became very, very grateful of. And as I look back over the years, I was very grateful and very blessed by parents, the parents who adopted me and cared for me. What I wanted to say was I'm a baby boomer, so born between 1945 and 1965. And my father fought in the British Army in World War II, and indeed my grandfather fought in the army in World War I. And in those days, Britain, Great Britain, United Kingdom, incorporating Northern Ireland, was more or less a white, homogeneous nation. And there was a degree, I suppose, of real consensus based on things like faith, monarchy, shared values, common ancestry, and a genuine, simple but deep pride in our British nations. So whether we were Irish, Northern Irish, obviously, since the 1920s when Northern Ireland became part of the United Kingdom, Wales, Scotland, and England, it was truly a United Kingdom. Now, I'm so naive as to say there weren't tensions within the United Kingdom, but there were difficulties from time to time. But there was a degree of community cohesion up until about the years 1997 to the years 2000. There was a unanimity in the British psyche. It was fairly rock-like, it was predictable, and indeed, when we look back to a national funeral, state funeral back in 1965 on the death of Sir Winston Churchill, an indigenous grateful population lined the streets at his state funeral in respect for his service to Britain, the Empire, and then later the Commonwealth. There was hardly a foreign-born person lining the streets. Those that did, they may have been British or they may have been from the Commonwealth. If they were foreign-born, they all had a consensus view that Churchill, if you like, had saved the day, particularly in his premiership from 1940 to 1945. So what happened to Britain? Well, I would say that Britain has become fragmented, and actually there's a degree of apartheid in the nation. With the ease of air travel and other forms of travel, there was an internationalization, a relaxing of borders. And it wasn't long after Tony Blair came to power that border integrity began to crumble away. So we saw what they call the new accession states of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and some of the Eastern European countries like Poland and so on were allowed unlimited access into the United Kingdom. Now, again, those nations, many of them hardworking, lovely, lovely people. Please, I'm not saying anything bad about those, about the Polish people, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Latvians. I really am not. They suffered a lot in the Second World War, and in many ways, they flocked. Once Tony Blair gave the green light, they flocked into Britain. And many of them have made incredibly positive contribution to England, to Scotland, to Ireland, to Wales, and so on. But I would say that the period 1997 to 2024 saw a diminishing of national border integrity, and there were tensions that led to a crumbling of national pride and fragmentation. Government by the nation state and its bonds began to loosen. Borders were soft. Policing became partial. And a phrase from 2024 is that policing became two-tier. And a sense of unfairness and imbalance in our institutions grew under Tony Blair's premiership. Britain was looking wild and in some respects quite ungovernable. Now, I think you have to add into that the massive immigration that took place from the year 2000 to 2024, where you've had probably anything from 1 to 2 million illegal immigrants living in Britain and at least 10 million legal immigrants into Britain, plus their children. So people from lands such as Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, India poured in by the hundreds of thousands, often into London, actually. African nations too added to the mix. And by the 2020s, we had a potpourri of nations, often focused in and around London and the southeast. Then in 2010, we saw the period of Tory rule, but we also saw business as usual. There was continued weakness and arguably an abandonment of, I say, small c, conservative or socially conservative values. Interestingly, we saw the rise of the British liberal left intelligentsia and its elites becoming detached from the lives of ordinary people. So, for example, a member of Parliament in the Houses of Westminster in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they may have opened a business. They may have done quite a lot before they came into Parliament. Many of them had fought in the Second World War. People like Harold Wilson, Ted Heath, and so on. But the Labour Party cut the bonds, if you like, between the white working class and itself. It became an Oxbridge type elite almost. Working class groups felt disenfranchised. They felt betrayed. Now, whether this was a Church of the elites are summed up, whether it was a Church of England bishop railing against leaving the EU in 2016, we voted to leave the EU. It didn't take place for another 4 years. Brexit, or whether it's a university professor who's critical of the right of centre development, like Brexit and other things, a mainstream media who seemed to almost self-hate and who almost seemed to hate the old ways of doing things. So they threw out the baby with the bathwater. Now, I'm going through things very, very quickly here. And this is, if you like, a potpourri of the unrepresentative, out of touch elites that were so disenfranchised. from the lives of ordinary people. And we've often said that within the M25, particularly in places like Islington and so on, where these Oxbridge often educated folk live, they are so out of touch with real British values. Now, not all, obviously, but the governing political class seemed to lose touch, whether they were Conservative or whether they were Labour. Indeed, the universities are almost wholly left liberal leaning. And this was seen in 2020 when they espoused this strange thing called critical race theory, or CRT, under the Black Lives Matter banner. So beloved by American academics, so irrelevant as far as British history is concerned. It was a pseudo-Marxist concept, ideology, and a form of politically correct thinking that most ordinary Britons shied away from. And then there was trouble. From about probably late teens, 2019, 2020, we had the pandemic, but then we also had a whole raft of illegal and legal immigrants, so that under Rishi Sunak's premiership, who said he would stop the boats, the dinghy crossings from Calais to Dover area, we had inward immigration of up to 700,000 a year. Illegal immigration, that was legal. Illegal immigration, nobody knows how many are here. Illegal immigrants crossing by boat across the Straits of Dover were not stopped by both Labour and, latterly, the governing Conservatives. The nation was cracking under the strain. Strains on education, strains on the National Health Service, health, housing, the economy, were all showing signs of overstress, dislocation, and alienation. Many indigenous Brits voted to leave the EU in 2016, hoping that the politicians would hear their call and their plea to take back control. It was fundamentally, Brexit was about sovereignty. It was about taking back control and so doing, ensuring border integrity. But there was a growing divide between them and us. The white working class and the lower white middle class were ditched by Labour in favour of minor interest groups, the idea of political correctness, the politicisation of things like the environment, the politicisation of gender, the politicisation of the trans movement, and so on and so forth. And the Tories sought more approval by being more liberal and more centrist. Britain was breaking apart. Add to immigration the highest tax burden since 1948 and a subservience to the strange cult of net zero. We call it net taxes for those of us who are against this strange thing of net zero. A deep divide was appearing between the governed and those who were in charge, the government. So we add to this potpourri, this strange amalgam in the 2020s, add to this an apartheid, a self-imposed apartheid of race and faith. Look at Bradford, look at Rochdale, look at Birmingham and other towns with a high Islamic presence. Many Muslims support jihad, the forcible imposition of Islamic ideas. And we've seen militant Islam in the 7/7 bombings in 2007 by British-born Muslims who came down to London and set off explosives. Amongst some young Muslims, Islam was proving to be a path to radicalism. Not all, of course not, but for many young Muslims, they wanted jihad. They didn't feel the bond of love and they didn't feel part of this nation. But if indigenous Britons, white Britons, raised concerns, the mainstream media countered it by either charges of racism or Islamophobia. The die was cast and many white Britons felt utterly utterly betrayed. Mass immigration, it was felt, by the white working class and the lower white middle class. Mass immigration must end, they said. University professor Matt Goodwin stated, highly diverse societies like Britain are low trust societies. Compare our society with Hungary, for example, that has a very, very low immigrant population. There has to be a better way. The difficulty now, a Labour government has been elected in July 2024, and it seems like more of the same, and the deep divides just keep on growing. Little is being done to rectify a great divide, and the blood of our fathers cries out without being heard for a deep change and a return to British values. Now, just at the end of this, thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. If you've listened this far, you deserve a medal. You really do. My references, a lot of this is based on the work of Douglas Murray, the author and journalist. He's an original thinker, gifted at encapsulating such changes. His main three books articulate some of the arguments I've made here in much greater depth. Professor Nigel Biggar, that's spelled Biggar, on colonialism. I'm just started his book actually on colonialism. It's a brilliant corrective to the self-hating universities, particularly some of the Oxbridge colleges. And then finally, I've mentioned him already, Matt Goodwin, professor at the University of Kent, produces some good solid summaries of the British dilemma and possible solutions. Can I just thank you for your time? I've spoken way beyond what I normally do. I'm going into 22 minutes now. Can I thank you again? Thank you for your patience. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to my channel, and I hope you didn't mind the anecdotal bit. It just tells you a little bit about me and where I'm coming from. Have a great day. Have a great afternoon. Have a great evening, and God bless you.